as we come to the end of the course, I wanted to first of all do a little recapping, okay? Because, you know, corporations play such a prominent role in our lives. I mean, the thing is that in many respects, and over the centuries, since they started the corporate concept during the Middle Ages, they've refined it and refined it and refined it. And really, the thing that makes corporations special, I think, is it is a response to a number of needs, and it also does things such as creates an environment where people are working collectively and have different roles within that. And of course, it is mainly about commerce, about business. You know, this isn't mentioned a lot, but you know, I've been in legal systems in other countries in the world. So I've had the opportunity to talk to lawyers from other countries and things like this. And it's much more prominent in other countries that lawyers are about business. In other words, here lawyers do lots of things, but and they're probably maybe in the main focused on business, but it doesn't get the prominence in day-to-day life. You don't think of the lawyer as you know, dealing with issues of commerce because so many things are wrapped up around trials, things like that on television. But the reality is that so much of what lawyers do deals with the business world, and indeed the very creation of lawyers that were not religiously based really was in response to the business activity going on in Rome. So, you know, it is inescapable that as paralegals that you have a good foundation in this. It's really, everybody should have a good foundation, but it's a busy world. So to recap, first of all, just kind of a shorthand definition of a corporation. It's a form of business organization which exists separate and apart from its owners. So for example, if you're a sole proprietor, there is no distinction between the business itself and the owner legally. With a corporation, it's different. Corporation is a legal person. It is capable of owning property. It is capable of suing and being sued. It is capable of being criminally prosecuted. So it is truly a legal person. The creation of the corporation is a key to understanding the notion of regulating corporations, and that is, corporations can only be created by government, and in the United States by state governments. The government basically frames what kind of lawful activity and behavior is acceptable for a corporation. And I will tell you that the rules do vary somewhat from state to state. That's why you hear about the Delaware Corporation, you know, and it has to do with how much flexibility exists with respect to the internal operations of the company. The Delaware is very favorable to broad authority with respect to the internal operations. And so it's important to keep in mind, in the United States, a company can be incorporated in Delaware under Delaware law, but it can operate in all the other states because of the full faith and credit provisions of the Constitution, where states have to recognize certain laws of other states. So the bottom line is that the you can have a situation where you have a dispute regarding the internal operations of a corporation brought in the state of Texas, but you have to apply Delaware law. So, it can get a little bit confusing. But in the main, the corporation is a separate legal person, and its authority is going to be subject to the control of the government. So you get to one question, and that is that what is so attractive about corporations that people are willing to say, okay, I'm going to use this form of business organization even though it subjects me to more regulation and hence more complication. Okay. Well, it's a good question. I'm glad I asked it. Let's talk for a minute about, okay, the corporate form of business organization. What are its strengths as far as you can tell up to this point? What's a strength if you were considering it versus other forms of
liability? Yeah.
Limitation of liability, that's huge.
Yeah.
Because so many people, you think of all the people who invest in the stock market, which is really, by and large, corporations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at any rate, if I'm going to go invest, let's say $30,000 in the stock market, or my 401k in the stock market, well, obviously I wouldn't want to lose all my money, but it would be insult to injury if I also could get sued on top of everything else. So the idea, if you invest in a certain type of stock like Apple computer, it takes a lot of sophistication to do the day-to-day operations of that company. The investors aren't really qualified by and large, okay? So the point being that you don't want to sit there and invest in the stock market and sit there and have to worry about the operation of the company. You want to see results, okay? But you don't want to micromanage anything because you don't know anything, okay, many times. So the point being that you don't want to be held liable for for decisions you're not really making, I guess is what it comes down to. So the idea of limitation of liability makes it a big deal. Okay. It also increases what we call entrepreneurship, where people are going to risk their own capital to engage in business. I just love when I came to Texas 40 years ago, and they called it business. There's something special about it, Yeah. It's one of those kind of things. It's kind of like, it's kind of like fajitas. You can't hear it. Fajitas and changed my life forever. So there's limitation of liability, but what else? What else makes it attractive when you start comparing it to the other thing?
I think it's perfect to raise money.
Yes. Capitalization. You take a business like Federal Express and think of what it took for an investment to open for their first day. If you're going to have a business and it's going to be sending packages across the United States all over overnight, you have to have all the delivery capability already in place for your first day of business. You've got to have the packaging. You've got to have the computers. You've got to have the aircraft, the trucks, the trained people, all of that. Well, it takes a lot of capital to set up an entire infrastructure. Now, there's simpler models, obviously, but the point is that the great thing about the corporation is that not only can it raise money, but it can raise money without having to pay it back.
Yeah.
By selling pieces of itself. Yeah. Pieces of itself called shares. And so, at any rate, the bottom line is that idea of capitalization, where you can actually raise money and not be immediately burdened with, with debt. You see. Typically, corporations do have debt. They have debt instruments called bonds, which can be issued. Those are, debt instruments. But to be able to raise money, to engage in business operations without the financial pressure of having debt service going on is a big deal. It also has another effect. That is, you have to explain your business plan to others. You got to say that this is, let me tell you why you should buy stock in this thing. In other words, they want the people that buy it want the stock to go up. Okay. Now at this point, I want to mention something that we already know about, but remember, there's the two worlds of corporations. There's the small corporations, sometimes family-owned, things of this nature, which did not seek the public to invest. So those corporations are usually primarily subject to state law. But once you go into offering the sale of stock to the public, now you've stepped into federal law, okay? And the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934 kicks in, which creates all sorts of requirements and obligations. Now, the corporation has a traditional and formal set of mechanisms, okay? We start with the three major players. First, you have the owners, right? What do they call the owners?
Shareholders.
Shareholders, yes. And then the shareholders, they elect who?
Directors.
The directors, right. The directors, of course, oversee the operation of the corporation, the old board of directors. And the directors, because they're not going to be involved in the day-to-day aspects of it, who do they elect?
Officers.
Officers, correct. So you have this mechanism where the owners elect the shareholders. Why? Well, they want people in there to be successful in terms of the operation of the company, so the value of their holdings, their stock goes up, you see. So at any rate, you have this role where the shareholders select the directors, and then they expect the directors to get the right officers and make sure that there's oversight so they do what they're supposed to do and increase shareholder value. Which brings up a point, because some people wonder what is actually the responsibility of corporate directors and officers, and primarily it is to increase shareholder value. So we now have the fundamentals in place about corporations. And now I want to talk a little about procedures. I mean, corporations are supposed to have periodic elections of directors and officers. The corporate rules are in a document called the bylaws, and they set forth the ground rules of the corporation. Typically, traditionally, and if you're going to have your stock sold on, quote, Wall Street, normally each shareholder has a vote for directors for each share of stock. In other words, if you've got 100 shares of stock, you've got 100 votes, that kind of thing. And those votes, you can directly vote them, or you can grant your right to vote to others, and they call that a proxy. You give someone else the right to vote your stock. Now, many corporations, operate smoothly. But they're facing really some interesting challenges in the 21st century, because owners are more conscientious in investing practice now. I mean, the and it makes good sense as an investor. If you have a company that, let's say, it has a record of damaging the environment, well, that might cause people not to purchase that stock for both financial and other reasons. They say if they're gonna keep doing this and they're not going to try to modernize and use the technology to reduce their carbon footprint or whatever you want to call it. I thought we're all made of carbon, so I guess we all got carbon footprints. But yeah, you got to watch this government lingo. Yeah, and so the thing is, though, is that there are people very sensitive about the environment. It matters to them, and they worry about it. And so, you know, how do you exert your power? You know, there's different ways people in a society like ours do that. One is the vote. The other is to get with like-minded people and form organizations, okay? That when people see the brand or something is said about the brand, you get positive feelings. You see, I mean, the thing is that, you know, the different feelings about things, some can be very passionate, some can be very matter-of-fact. You know, there are people that strive to make money, and that is their entire focus, okay? So they don't really concern themselves too much with the issue of, are these really good, are these people really doing a good thing for the country, the community, or whatever. I mean, it's about money. But my point is, more and more, what you're seeing is it's becoming more than money. And so this is what I'm saying. This is, you know, you hear talk about democracy and so on and so forth. And sometimes people have a tendency to feel like they're getting wound up every day and sent off like one of those little robots, you know. But the fact is we actually have a lot more power. And so the more people learn about corporations, the more they learn that they, you know, with their 401k or whatever, they can have an influence, okay? I mean, when I think about Starbucks, for example, after I get over the cost of the coffee, you know, and, you know, after you get over that, then what happens is that that you think about Starbucks as, you know, they went into Louisiana after you know, Katrina, and they were building houses. You know, a lot of public service by the company, and everybody pitches in. I mean, it's kind of a family-like effort on their part. So, you know, you think good thoughts. You don't feel bad about doing business with them.
It's like doing back.
Giving back to the community.
Right. Right. And recognizing that these people that are hurting, they're part of your customer base.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that kind of thing. And you know, I've done a lot of reading on their CEO, Howard Schultz, and everything. And you know, he wrote a book about when he had to come back. You know, the Starbucks started to have some problems, and he came back, and it was so hard for him, you know, that he had to make decisions about closing a significant number of Starbucks. Maybe not to the overall percentage, but enough to be noticed. And there were these Starbucks that were not very good performing stores, but the neighborhood people had fallen in love with their locations, and I mean, they were begging them not to close it. And you know, he talked about the difficult decisions that you have to make, and he made the point that you can't do the good if you don't make the money. I mean, if you don't have you know, you've got to make the money to pay the employees, you know, and things like this. And you know, I mean, and other things that Howard Schultz had this thing about, he felt his father had been left out in the cold when he was injured on the job or something, and didn't have any medical care through his employer. And this was a thing he insisted on when they decided to go public. Excuse me. He took the position that there was a certain moral requirement that he felt, and he felt this would distinguish Starbucks from a lot of places. And the people that were promoting Starbucks going public, they didn't want him to do it. They said, it doesn't look good on the balance sheet. And he said, well, then I'm not going to do it at all. And it turned out he saw ahead, you see. And so my point is that there's some things we all care about in common, okay? That they're, but there's also certain areas we have where perhaps we or our families have been disproportionately affected by something, and we want, and we want to make sure that our money is going to the kind of companies that we could sit there and say, I think these are good people doing good things. I mean, I think that's it. So, and for example, one of the most powerful brands in America is the National Football League.
Right.
And they are very, very sensitive about things. I mean, they're very concerned. They, I don't know if they still do it, but basically all the income they made off of the brand of their sales of, football jerseys and stuff like this, all of this went to charity.
Wow.
I don't know if all of it still does, but there was a time when all of it went to charity. And so the thing is that, why is that? Because they realize that their brand is critical if people are going to pay the advertisers that pay them their money and all of this. So people are getting very wise to this, and let me give you an example. We are now the #1 energy country in the world, okay? And we weren't at one time. And the reason was is the battle over environmental issues primarily. But if you look, what's happened is because of that, people didn't want to invest as much in the oil companies because they felt that they didn't really care what harm was being done by their products and this sort of thing, that it pushed the oil industry into a area to where it had to start looking at things other than fossil fuels, to leave a smaller footprint from their operations. Okay, so you notice now you see a lot of advertising about them talking about their research and stuff like this to try to make things better for what they're doing, and that sort of thing. So it is amazing the subtle nature of things like being able, having dissident shareholders that object to some customers that their company's dealing with, or some practices they engage in. So in a lot of ways, it's certainly not a pure democracy, but the point is that it's a very much reflective of America as a whole, and that is, that you can't always get your own way. You may believe that you have the high road and everything, but the fact is that there's just more people that believe another way, you see. But it does show you can have influence, which I think is an important notion. And I mean that very much, that about the idea of it empowering people to where they feel relevant. I mean, sometimes people don't feel like they have any control over anything. They become disconnected, and that's dangerous for our society. So there's a lot of kind of subtle things about this whole notion of being a corporate citizen. And the idea is the people who would be shareholders and would invest, they can put pressure on these corporations and say, you know what, you're not the only party that's doing this kind of thing, and you're not the only person selling this product. maybe I'm just gonna go to somebody who's more sensitive towards issues that I'm concerned about, okay? That sort of thing. So this is why now you see such quick response by corporations if somebody associated with them says something that's that they believe offends their customer base, this sort of thing. And so in a way it is one of those ways in the 21st century that I believe that people will be able to further empower themselves. I mean, when, in the 60s, when I was a young man, that the empowerment was consumers, being a consumer. Well, now it's not just being a consumer, although that's still there, but being an owner, being involved in the ownership, of corporations, and saying, and I want to, and now you're seeing portfolios being offered where they say these are very sensitive to the environment, or these are very sensitive to labor conditions and things like this. So it's really quite remarkable thing. At the same time, there's still the whole thing, you got to make a profit, eventually.
Exactly.
Right. But sometimes it is remarkable that how people can be in for the long haul. We see a lot of quick buck artists in the markets. They want to day trade, make money every day, and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like, if you want to do that, you need to go to those poker machines down there. But you're seeing much more depth in the thinking of the average person about these issues. But so the corporation now has to keep on track. I mean, it needs to make a profit, okay, and it needs to compete in all of this. So what it looks to do is to find a way to do good things, to jettison that which is not considered to be popular, okay, and so forth. So there's a lot that goes on in the world of corporations now. I mean, you owe it to your shareholders to pay attention to social issues,
Right.
And make sure that what you're saying reflects the value structure of the company. So and now that activism, if you will, that moves into the corporate sphere, that is not an exclusive situation. You can elect to have a corporation that's not publicly traded. Okay, you can elect to do that. In that case, you can get up every day and say praise greed. That's fine. I'll pay my tax money, and then everybody. I'm a corporate citizen. And I raise my own flag every day.
Exactly.
I live to myself.
I'd like each of you to kind of give me an example you can think of as where corporations were affected by their shareholders for other than just financial reasons.
Well, I don't know if that's a good example.
Let's hear it.
When Shell had that big spill.
You're right about that. When they have these ecological disasters, man, it really affects affects things. So yeah, those things are bad for raising more money for projects, and sure, that is a good one. What do you got?
I think, what about with Papa John's, when the owner, he kind of had some racist remarks?
Right.
And they because that had kind of been going on for years. He'd been saying stuff, and then they issued an apology. He said something, issued an apology. But then recently, just like this year, he said something, and then they kind of just wrote him out of the company.
And that's an interesting point, because the thing is that this talks about how the corporation is a separate person, okay?
Exactly.
Because the thing is that the person who created the controversy was the founder
Right.
of the company,
Wow.
okay?
Yeah.
But once you start operating in the public venue and selling your stock to the public, now you've got all these owners. You're not just the only owner anymore.
Yeah, right.
You've got these other owners, and you're not permitted. I mean, I'm saying not permitted, but the thing is you can't, without consequences, sit there and do something which impairs your brand. You see, I mean, and so what happened in that instance was basically, yes, he may have been the founder, but there's a board of directors, and that board of directors controls who the officers are and what policy is, you see. And they're saying, we're not going to damage our brand anymore, with you a part of it. If that's your attitude, this is no longer your company. I'm talking about in the purely control aspects of it. It's no longer your company. And so the thing is that, you have stock and everything, and we can't judge our shareholders and say, you've got to show that you go to church every Sunday or whatever to be a shareholder. But the thing is that when somebody does that, it impairs the brand, the value of the investment, and so that's why they step in pretty rapidly, And it doesn't take much, The thing is that years ago, some of this stuff would have gone unnoticed, okay?
Right.
It would have. But now with the technology and the social media and
You can't get away. You can't
Right.
get away with those things.
yeah, this brings up another point, was that I mentioned that today we would talk about the concept of monopoly.
Right.
Okay, and this is an area that is difficult, because that sometimes what happens is you do such a good job that nobody can compete with you.
Yes.
And then now, so is that socialism? You got to reduce everybody to the lowest, common denominator, or what? But the idea is that sometimes, the point is that you do run into situations where, somebody is intentionally trying to gain control of the market of some type of product or service, and not necessarily because their product or service is the best, but because that they've been around a little longer, have a little more power, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's difficult. You have competition. We have so many products now. Like we have different kinds of. We have the Android phone, the iPhone, and things like that. And so the thing is that, let's say that Apple wanted to buy out all the Android companies. Well, they're going to have a problem with it, okay? And it's not the idea of this is all part of a grand plan, and then what's going to happen is that there'll be nobody able to compete with me. Sometimes people, a business will buy a competitor because for any number of reasons. The competitors, the guiding light for the competitor may have passed away, and the family doesn't know what to do, and or it's had bad leadership, and to salvage itself, it merges with another company. But let me tell you, the big concern I have about this is it's not easy to understand when you talk about monopolies. For one thing, it's hard for me to talk to some people because there's that whole group of people that weren't even, that I teach, that weren't even alive when I became a lawyer. So the thing is I know at the time I became a lawyer in 1981, you couldn't own a phone. You couldn't own one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
You could lease
cell phone?
one.
Yes.
Yes.
You could lease one.
Wow.
But basically, AT&T pretty well controlled the whole infrastructure, everything. And what you would do is, you could rent a phone.
Wow.
Couldn't own it, but you could rent it.
Right.
And it was so cheap. It was like $1 a month.
Oh, okay.
That, you know, why get mad at them? They're giving you a great deal, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the problem was competition creates better products, better technology, that sort of thing. So the thing is that AT&T, their idea of a huge breakthrough was the Princess phone. It had nothing to do with but how it looked and what color the casing was, you know. They would have these pink Princess phones, you know, and that sort of thing. But what about what a phone could do?
Right.
You know, I mean, and so what happened was the Justice Department forced AT&T to break up. Said it was interfering with you know, with the whole notion of you know, of the advance of technology and so forth, because they had a monopolistic hold on things. It didn't say, like, I don't know if you've read some of the cases, but the cases on monopolies, that a lot of it sounds like they just want the intent to do it. You have to have the intent to do it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing about this is kind of counterintuitive. That if you want to compete, well, don't you want to outdo the other party?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that's what you want to do. I mean, Steve Jobs always badmouthed other people's products, just badmouthed.
Yeah.
You know, and I won't use the words he used, but basically he thought it was all trash, basically, except for his.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, you know, the thing is he worked hard to make it at the top rung. So, but the point becomes when does that become a monopoly? And the whole issue of bundling came up, where Microsoft was sued for antitrust, predatory type behavior to crush their competitors. And what they did was, remember, if you wanted a browser, you had to get a browser separately, like through Netscape or whatever. Yeah, and then what happened was Microsoft started bundling things. You know, and you save money. It works. We built it to work within our system, you know, sort of thing. And so, I mean, it was like putting a whole part of the industry out of work, sort of thing. So it can be very difficult in talking about these monopolies, but the thing that I take issue with, and this whole thing about trying to declare Facebook a utility, and that way the government gets in to regulate it and that sort of thing. The fact of the matter is that in the scheme of things, nobody's required to be on Facebook. It's not an absolute necessity to be on Facebook. Nobody is going to starve to death because they can't get on Facebook. No one's going to die of thirst because they can't get on Facebook. So I mean, my point is that the government is just suffering every day over two things. One is that they want to tax the internet use so bad. They want to put a penny on every click. I mean, I'm just saying that they want to do it so bad. They're just going through the shakes because there's an opportunity to take someone else's money once again. You know? So, and I'm sure it'd be for good purposes, but the thing is that I can think of some of those. the obvious point ultimately though is that that I don't think Facebook should be considered a utility. It presents great opportunities. People, for example, I've got 6 kids and 10 grandkids, and they're spread all over the place. It's nice
Yes.
to be able to say to your friends out there, I'm not going to send you all these baby pictures, but I'll give it to you, and you can look at it and then get rid of it. You know what I'm saying? So it is a convenience. It is a place to blow off steam. It is a place to get some information.
Yeah.
And so my point is I take the issue of monopoly very, very seriously, and normally for many of the cases you've read, you have to be intending to be predatory. Basically, you're trying to corner the market. So we don't know where that it will take us.
I have a question
Yes.
about monopolies. Right now, Disney is preparing to launch its own streaming service.
Right.
And in preparation of that, they bought up all of the Marvel entertainment titles. They're going to have them all just on their platform. They forced Netflix to kind of give up their deal with Marvel. And I read yesterday that now Disney is going to buy Hulu, the streaming service. So is that going to turn into a monopoly? Because
Well, the Justice Department will look at it. And they have a little check and balance thing to where they give the government a heads up. But there's 2 kinds of monopolies. There's a vertically integrated monopoly, and there's a horizontal. Horizontal. And for example, let's say that I wanted to have a monopoly, on the sale of iron. Well, if I were the only one that could, if I bought up all the sources, ingredients to create the iron, create the steel, that would be like a vertical monopoly. Okay. Now if I went and I lowered prices beyond the ability to make any money, because I knew I was bigger than is within the power of the government. The state government, because it allows, who allows the company to exist in the first place. And the second, the second, item is that it gives companies infrastructure and things like this. In other words, they want the companies to give it its money and that sort of thing. But it also is very effective way to capture money for taxes. Okay, so where do you think that the law might be defective when it comes to corporations? Where is the law not doing enough?
I think we were talking about the Facebook. I think in that part, the government is everything is going beyond the control of the government, because some of the information that users putting in is quite too much to control. For example, criminal people is posting videos in Facebook, and the people can watch at them, and nobody's controlling that. People is doing
Well, I mean,
business
they're promoting in this election cycle to allow felons to vote. I mean, there's a couple different theories on it. One is once you've served your time, why do you have to keep on getting punished? In other words, why is that necessary? So the thing is that I would say this, that there are times that companies, by accident, have a disproportionate power And I think that worries people. They don't want a bunch of corporate boardsmen running the United States of America. So you do have that, you do have that balancing act about what corporations should be doing, and this sort of thing. So we talk about how the corporation kind of interacts with the world, but once again, is there any issue that you feel is going to be, the kind of issue that that shareholders will get stern with their company about? We know about the oil industry because that part we know, but what?
Like 15 years ago, I remember it was a very big deal with the fashion designers companies because they were making clothes only for skinny, very thin models. And all the people became, and all the problems with the anorexia, bulimia, that became along all the people. And they were pushing that, no, the fashion designers should, make people clothes for everyone. Not only skinny, thin people. I think that the shareholders may push for that.
I've heard that. I had a friend who was a male model in Italy.
Oh, okay.
And very, very handsome, very well built guy, but he was too big, they said. He was too big. I mean, their models tended to be slimmer in the shoulders and things like this. I mean, that just happens, sometimes. You can't. There's bias and there's prohibited bias. I mean, that's
true.
I like to think that there's someone for everyone.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
That is so true.
Someone for everyone, and that's the whole market sense. Well, you see this now with e-commerce and stuff, where they're advertising like socks. Like, do your socks really do it for you? And the thing is, for some people, it may be a big deal. I mean, I don't know. The thing is,
exactly.
Perhaps the benefit, I can tell my parents of being brought up poor was I'm less discriminating. As long as the socks don't have holes in them.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. But it's all relative. But you see now they have these ads for the things that are better quality, better dog food. I don't know if you've heard that on the radio.
Oh yeah, exactly. I'm like, when did it become an issue?
Light.
And then all kinds of things that again are better ecologically.
Exactly.
The interesting thing is that it's all very subtle. People want to run in and say, we're not doing anything. Well, actually, there is a lot being done. I'll give you an example. One of the great inventions as a trial lawyer, I'll ever believe in is the electronic filing.
I know what you're talking about.
I mean, the thing is that it used to be, where are we going to put all this paper and that sort of thing? And now you don't have to drive down to the courthouse or put it in the mail. You can, electronically file it, and you're required to electronically file it. So by definition, you're going to kill fewer trees. That kind of thing. So sometimes it's just you'll take a niche like in the practice of law, and what do these people do? They sure gin out a lot of paper, is what they say. Well, they probably reduced it dramatically. So. At any rate, I want to turn for a minute. I asked you all to read about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act.
Right.
Who wants to take a shot at telling me what basically is the act intended to do?
Avoid fraud and those kind of activities that harms the could be bad for the public or the share. To manipulate data,
Right. Yeah, it focused in a lot of ways on accounting.
Yes, I was about to say,
Yeah,
it's
that
about
was
the
it.
transparency, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right, you know.
Because of all the fraud that was,
Right.
they were giving away.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
I mean,
just,
I
it
didn't-
wasn't
right.
just Enron, but it was that was the high profile company. It was the seventh largest company in America at the time. So that kind of became the big story, but there were others that had it. But basically, the Enron was taking advantage of some very exotic tax rules. Like take all your debt and put it into another entity. And you could do that, but you had to follow certain rules. And they didn't follow the rules, and there were other things that they did. Well, I don't think you ought to be able to offload your debt. I mean, you know, come on. I mean, that's like you coming over to my house and you dumping all your trash in my front yard. Yeah. So at any rate, the Enron thing was about fraud on a number of levels. But let me tell you where I got interested in it, and that had to do with what it says about lawyers.
Okay.
You remember, and I'm going through this matter on a corporate, a corporate litigation situation, a corporate lawsuit, where the question has to do with who's actually in control of the corporation. What can the corporation do to protect itself? But one of the interesting things, and I raised this issue in the litigation that I'm involved in, is that when you represent a corporation, you've got to have some ground rules with them. If you are the corporate attorney, you better make sure that you've been picked by the right authority. In other words, if you're going to be the general counsel for the company, it better be the shareholders that made you the general counsel. See what I'm getting at? I mean, through their through their directors and that sort of thing. So I mean, it gets pretty sensitive on that kind of issue. Let me read a little bit under some comments relating to the SEC adopts attorney conduct rule under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. One of the rules is to report evidence of a material violation of the law. So let's say, the guy's a janitor, he wanders in and, he's vacuuming and everything, and he sees all this stuff laying out. It's all these notes about how to engage in falsifying certain investments. You're supposed to say something. So you can't lie for the company, is what it amounts to. You can't block legitimate investigations. And there's others, but the point is that attorney conduct is paramount, because let's say I'm representing the company, okay, and the company is being sued for violating various, let's say, civil rights protections or whatever with respect to their employees. Well, or they're siphoning off money and not reporting it. These kinds of things. Well, I mean, the point is that it's touchy, but the attorneys, who are they really representing? In other words, are they representing the best interests of the shareholders by taking a course of action? Because I mean, that's who we're left with. I mean, you've got the directors, which basically oversee the operation. But the fact of the matter is that what do you do when the corporation that can only act through people? Okay, what do you do when that person's telling you to hold off the dogs? Don't fight any depositions they want to send you. Fight, so you don't have to give them anything. Now you got yourself a problem. How do you think they ought to deal with that? It's very difficult, for the lawyer to sit there and second guess,
Right.
and all that. So it's a touchy area. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break?
Okay, good.
Before the break, we were, talking about the kind of, the challenges that faces a corporate attorney. Where you have, who are you really representing? Okay, are you representing? Does that mean that you're supposed to protect the officers of the corporation? What if you don't think that the officer is acting in the best interest of the corporation? Well, where does that take you? If it's a matter of policy, and the policy's not illegal, okay, well, maybe the corporate attorney should step back. But it can be difficult sometimes when you get into the ethical issues and so on and so forth, where somebody doesn't like the way somebody's handling things. This has to do with the idea that there are legitimate government inquiries into corporations, whether it's the SEC, whether it's if they have a licensed activity, licensing, and so on and so forth. And the idea of the attorney's obligation in that situation is not to management, but it's to the owners. Because the thing is that these are investors, and these people rely on their officers not to be self-dealers, you see. And so and then there's the protection of the consuming public, as well. But I'm just making the point that the Sarbanes-Oxley law, what it touches on is issues like conflict of interest. Who is the actual client, you see? Now, I will tell you, as paralegals, you won't be advising on that necessarily. But you ought to know a potential problem when you see it. When something's clearly not in the interests of the people who would own it, and the shareholders would say, you should not be doing this sort of thing. As a group, you say. The thing is, all it does, if you try to obfuscate legitimate government inquiries and so forth, the company's going to get fined. It's the same way if you have open violation of regulations like OSHA. You see, they want someone to step up and say, look, this is against the company's interest. If somebody gets hurt and then they find out about this, you're going to pay a bunch of money, which hurts your bottom line. So the point is that it's tough. In the case that I've been working on recently, where there's a large lawsuit against this individual and a group of companies he owns or controls in some way, and my client was the head of one of those companies, and even though my client has disconnected with them, they haven't taken any action to put somebody else in charge. So the founder, if you will, the main guy, it basically is being represented by the same lawyer in the litigation as representing the company. And my point to that lawyer is that the company's a legal person. If in other words, if there's a big judgment against that company, I mean, that's bad for that company, anybody who might benefit from that company, you see. So it seemed to me like there may be a conflict of interest here. And that's the kind of thing business lawyers have to watch out, and be careful of. It's easy in some areas of the law, like you can't represent the husband and wife in the same divorce. I mean, you can't do that. But sometimes in business matters, it's a little more difficult. Okay, enough of Sarbanes-Oxley talking about that, but with respect to the accounting and so on and so forth, there shouldn't be, misrepresentations and, engaging in false accounting mechanisms and so on and so forth. And that could only be a good thing. Now I want to kind of end up today with, you all have had excellent attendance. which is appreciated, because it's, I want to make sure that you get the greatest choices and opportunities, and I'm not saying that I'll be responsible for it. That it reminds me, I was at a graduation one time, and we had a young man who went to school here, and he dressed up every day, I mean, impeccably. Like he looked like he was going right to the courthouse to try a case. And, he got along with everybody, but, other students, they dressed down and that sort of thing. And then when I went to graduation, I knew who I was going to meet. His mother was there. And she wanted to thank me for the impact that I had on him and everything. I said, I think he was fine when he got here. It was pretty evident to me. So, the people who come here have a lot to offer, and what I want to do is add to it. I mean, that's basically it, and let you know about the joys of working in this field. I mean, I run into graduates all the time here in my practice. And thank God I still do that, because it gives me the opportunity to see some of our graduates actually in action, whether they be gone on to be lawyers or whether or not they're working in other capacities. So, at any rate, that's kind of it. But were there things that you learned about, let's say, business organizations that you really didn't know anything about before you got here? Or did you have a pretty good business savvy?
No, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything.
Especially about liability, and
it's
how it's different from one organization
Yeah.
type to another.
Well, kind of breaking down the considerations in making the choices. One is limitation of liability, but you have other issues like control.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, if the guy that was the founder of Papa John's, if he had control, he could have said, too bad. I'm going to continue to say whatever I want to say. If you don't like it, too bad.
Too bad.
I mean, I'll buy your stock back from you. You won't get much for it, but but for some people, control is very important. When I think of that kind of person, I think of someone like Ross Perot, if you've ever heard of him. Ross Perot is quite a person. I mean, he took a relatively small amount of money and turned it into a fortune. But I'll make the story short. His company would set up computer systems. Like when they had the Iranian Revolution and he had employees trapped over there, they were setting up the Social Security system, like the computers and everything for the Social Security system in Iran.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, and they called it EDS, Electronic Data Systems. Well, it was purchased by General Motors. And as part of the deal, just part of the deal, that Ross Perot became the largest single shareholder in GM. But being the largest single shareholder in GM does not give you control.
Control, right.
But apparently Ross didn't quite, he also got a seat on the board of directors. But he didn't quite get that. You know, he goes into a meeting and says, you know what? We got to learn to do something right around here. Just one thing right, you know. And supposedly he started showing up at factories and stuff like this. And they were calling Detroit and saying there's a guy in here with a bad haircut and a funny hair, funny ears and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is the having been in complete control of his electronic data systems, you know, he thought as a single largest shareholder that meant that he had more of a voice than he did. And so that wasn't a marriage made in heaven, but so they finally bought Ross out to leave, you know, and that sort of thing. So, you know, you get into those kinds of issues where control for some people is everything. They feel, well, everybody's done this. I do it from time to time where I go into a place, a business, and it's just, it may have a number of problems. It may have poor service, or it may have people who don't understand their product or service, or, you know, bad parking. I remember I was in Denny's one time and they didn't have grits for breakfast. I said, what? Who's running this outfit? New York City?
It's Texas, man.
Yeah, but there are times where I said, if I were in charge of this place, things would be different. I mean, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, well, that's part of the whole control thing. You know, the idea of, you know, that's the thing about a sole proprietor. That you don't get limitation of liability, but you get control, you see. So the thing is that now, and if you think about it, the reason that people will gravitate to limitation of liability is because of what is beyond their control, you see. The idea is that liability in just about everything in the law follows control. You see what I'm saying? In other words, you know, when there's a, you know, they don't usually prosecute the person at the very bottom and give him the worst sentence. It's somebody who was directly hands-on in doing the wrong thing. So the sole proprietorship is, yep, there's personal liability, so you better have a good insurance policy. But on the other hand, you've got control and you've got simplicity. Now, this is a complicated world, but I'm just saying, unless you've got some incredible persona, and people believe everything you touch will turn to gold. But generally, it's not a good way to raise money. And you think about it, that the personal liability, not be able to raise money and that sort of thing, for a couple of reasons. For example, remember we talked about the concept of perpetuation. Can the company, without significant disruption, survive the death of the owner?
The owner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a sole proprietor, you pass away. The business may be vital, it may be fantastic, but it is dead legally. You see, there's that issue. But a corporation, since it exists separate and apart from its owners, an owner dies, somebody inherits his shares, but the company as an entity can go on. That means you can make long-term loans and long-term plans and this sort of thing. So the whole idea of perpetuation is a very important feature. Some things are tax driven. I mean, sometimes what happens is that you get in a business. I have a long-time friend that I met who's a Chinese, and of course I lived over there for a while, and we became friends and stayed very close friends. But to him, it was all about the numbers. Okay, I mean, you've heard a penny saved is a penny earned. that kind of thing. Well, he strongly, believed that. So, for example, he would say, well, what, do you consider the economics of you delivering your legal services and stuff? I said, to a point. To a point I do, but there are times where, as a lawyer, you have to joust at windmills. If you lose money because of it, well, you have to make the decision whether you like yourself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so the thing is that is, again, that's back to the control, issue. Is that, I picked and chose my lost causes. You see. But the thing is that, is there something that you found out about corporations that you just didn't know about, or were you just generally not knowledgeable?
No, the thing is that the corporations has the governmental frame to be created, and it differs from country to country. In my country, it's not the same freedom to do and the flexibility to do.
Right.
You just have a few types of business organizations, but I learned that here you have a lot of flexibility according to your needs.
Well, you're right. There are companies everywhere, but in other countries, that their political economic systems are different. So, for example, this is one of the things that's so interesting about the United States is that, one of the justifications in countries that want to be an owner of the actual companies, part owner, all owner, whatever, control the means of production, is that they give any number of reasons. But part of the reason is a lot of times the government is shelling out money that promotes business. So why shouldn't they have a stake in it? Part of it. It's kind of amazing. You take that when I was a kid, I remember John Kennedy when he became president and made a speech and said, we're going to put men on the moon by the end of the decade. And all of a sudden, the economic power of the United States was suddenly focused on making this happen. They created new, industries and everything that created God only knows how many business opportunities, from Texas Instruments and, so there are these different models in different countries. The United States, I think, is somewhat unique, is because it doesn't, the government doesn't seek an ownership interest.
Yes.
Despite its tremendous, like the big box effect of the NASA program, And I can remember I was in a truck with 4 other people. I was installing air conditioning at that time. And we were driving back, it had been a dirty job and all that, and we're listening on the radio to the moon landing, and there wasn't a sound out of, usually, at the end of the day, there wasn't a sound out of any of us for an hour.
Wow.
Just believing it happened. So the point is that all of that big box commitment, it was justified to the public in a couple of ways. One is it was a military program. If we don't get to the moon, the Russians will and start dropping bombs on us from the moon. That's kind of one picture, so it was a military thing. But on the other side was John Kennedy's kind of call to, let's as a nation compete. Let's let our ingenuity and system, the American way, let it get out there and compete. Whereas, other countries, they provide important assistance. Many countries provide the infrastructure. and then collect the taxes on the back end. But, it's a matter in some respects of degree. The concept of corporate citizenship extends far into the political side where, in other words, you notice in the United States there's a debate about what the government should be doing. In other words, the government, the Constitution didn't explicitly guarantee that everybody had a right to a job, or if they didn't get a job, a right to a paycheck. The thing is, for some people it makes perfect sense, and for others it doesn't. Okay, that's what politics is all about. You bang the different ideas together and see if you can build a consensus. And elections are telling you that there's a consensus. So that's really it. But you notice now, it's happening in corporations, where people say, I don't just want to invest my money, I want to know how it's being used, and so forth. So it's a remarkable thing. What about you? I know you have kind of a unique perspective. You've been, you're from a different country.
Actually, when we were talking about monopoly, I was talking to my husband yesterday, and I was like, it's just amazing how it is here in the States, because back home I cannot open a McDonald's. I cannot open any franchise, because it's monopolized by certain families, by certain people, and by the government. They won't even give you the license to, start a corporation or get a franchise, or, that flexibility you were talking about, So it's just amazing, anybody can own a franchise here? I don't have to be a certain entity or a...
Well, there's a long told story about Ford Motor Company, where that you couldn't get a franchise out of Ford if you were Jewish.
Oh, wow.
And Henry Ford was somewhat vocal about his anti-Semitism. But I think it wasn't until 1960 that they had the first distributorship, or dealership they call it, that was owned by a Jew. So to some degree, the government does some of the same things, with their power. Sometimes they bestow it on their friends and cohorts, and that's probably where you get the term the swamp up in Washington. And, everybody up there seeking, to use their influence to get to be treated specially, and and sometimes it's we do it with industries, like for example, I don't know if it's still true anymore, but it used to be illegal to engage in sewing in your home and then selling what you sew.
Oh.
Yeah, there was you couldn't do that because you were competing with the garment district and stuff like that. So there was that kind of thing. But yet companies do have different approaches.
Yes.
Now the good news is that you don't have to be an American to buy stock in an American company.
Yeah.
Just like if you're an American and you want to buy stock in a Chinese company, you can do that, or a Vietnamese company if you want to do that. You see, so you're allowed to sit there and say, well, the whole financial markets are pretty international.
Right.
And that's a good thing. The one thing about trade, there's no trade in products without trades in ideas.
That's true.
Okay, and so that's why I think it's a great thing that people today are getting more having a greater understanding of their influence, their potential influence in the guidance of our commerce. In other words, we want you to do good things. We want you to be a good steward of the power that our collective unity creates. So that, but in the final analysis, you've got those issues which are combining the social and the legal and all this. And legal, I say, sometimes you'll have a group of shareholders and they say, this is a disreputable way to conduct business. That you should not be conducting business with this group of people. You should not, or this country, or whatever. You see, the thing is that the only boycotts governments like are the ones that governments make.
Yeah.
They, when they had the boycotts, civil rights boycotts back in the '60s. I mean, this was a criminal thing. I mean, you're actually conspiring not to buy something. So it kind of depends upon what your perspective is, but there's the nuts and bolts, as you know, of corporate law and making sure the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and that you have the compliance with government rules and the following of the corporate bylaws and not to engage in shareholder oppression, where just because you have more shareholders in a company that's not publicly held doesn't mean you can use it and just deprive that other owner of any value, you say. So there's things like that. Anybody else, anything that it strikes them that they just didn't think about before or didn't know about with respect to corporate law?
No, I think that is pretty good. I was impressed how simple it is to open a business here, and this makes me understand how many businesses you have here, not only in Texas and in the U.S.
That's why they call it the land of opportunity.
That's the thing is that the United States is a very seductive place.
Yes, it is.
We know.
It's the old thing about you've got this powerful magnet and you've got a paper clip coming towards you and you're saying, get out of here. The thing is that the reality of it is that yes, this is why, well, it's interesting that it's the way we do business that brings so much capital to us. That's one thing. The other thing is it's safer here. Okay, I mean, the thing is we have, when the Democrats, clean the slate with victories in an election, it's not the same thing as a revolution. We still have the same. We still have the same currency. Yeah, I mean, So the thing is that yes, but part of the seduction is the ease with which you can do business. Okay, so I look at on some level as a lawyer, and I know what people are going to say if they were to be sitting here now. You're just worried about not getting your fees. No, not exactly. Believe me, people screw up enough that I'll do fine. But the thing that concerns me is like I told you, you saw it was easy to incorporate, okay? And now you can actually create a corporation. But it's kind of like babies. Just because you can doesn't always mean you should. Right. That's kind of the...
You need to have some skills.
Right. There needs to be ideally some professional consultation before someone does it. But here's my feeling, that it is our policy, for example, in Texas, that it comes down on the side of making it easier to go into business. Okay? In other words, we're not going to prevent you from having access to the ability to incorporate your own business. You don't have to go out and press some point and click thing somewhere to do it for you. If you want to incorporate your own business, you should have the power to do that and the blessing of the state of Texas. I mean, that's really it. Like, you don't have to sit there and get permission from some, shadowy political boss or anything like that in order to do it. So the thing is, and I think the reason for that is that, let's face it, a lot more of what happens in America is out in the open. I mean, whether it's on social media, news, fake news or not, news. The point is, it's all out there pretty much. People, scream about their privacy rights, and they're telling everybody their business on Facebook. Kind of a lot of irony, but I do think that from where I stand, I mean, my travels and things like that, I think that there, is a just across the board thing. I think that the United States is a very welcoming place for commerce.
Absolutely.
And of course, don't think that the Americans aren't mindful of that. I mean, the thing is that you want to combine immigration law and corporate law. If you come and bring enough money with you to start a company of enough size, guess what? You are now a resident. Right. So the thing is, so it is about economic interest. I mean, we're seeing a lot of fascinating things going on right now, but and that's one of the things that becomes kind of an issue they're raising politically. If you have a corporation that's essentially international, and you see those now where you have leadership from all different kinds of ethnic and national backgrounds in high corporate positions. Companies that people thought, this is an American company. Well, the thing is that that's a fact. And the concern, and this is where the law gets involved, that, that many people want American companies to be loyal to America. Well, I mean, the thing is that I guess that makes them corporate citizens then, you know what I'm saying? If that's what they want them to be loyal. But, here is the balance. On the one hand, you want them to be loyal, but on the other hand, you've got these differing points of view. You have a company that operates in different countries. I mean, let's say it operates in Russia. Well, I mean, Russia has their own issues and problems. I mean, if they have a company that that's out of Nigeria, they have different issues and problems. Now, there's some universal problems, but I'm just saying problems that can be created. Like, for example, you're inland. You're in the middle of a continent. You don't have coastal waters. I mean, you have to become more ingenious. You're like Japan, which is basically built on a bunch of volcanic rocks, and there's not, and so you have to use your maximum ingenuity. You see that kind of thing. So, my point is that I think that the greatest power in the United States is its flexibility.
Absolutely.
Okay, and also its tolerance to listen to things that sometimes people don't want to hear. That's the whole thing. You have somebody say 200 statements. 199 of them makes you want to choke them. Okay? But there's the 200th one that might make all the difference in the world. So, you know, and you notice, there's another thing you mentioned about different countries. We can access a lot of information on our corporations in the public venue.
Yes.
Many countries, you can't go and
No.
get into that at all.
Yes, yes.
And you know why? That's why, because there's so many situations where they've got government people with ownership
Yes.
and they're self-dealing, is because it's not out in the open. See? That's the thing. Well, I know it's not completely over yet, but I'm going to miss you guys.
Yes.
You're
I know
gonna have me
not
for another
everybody's
4
finished.
months.
Not everybody's finished this time.
Another 4 months.
It fly by.
It fly by.
Time flies.
And I hope that you haven't found corporate and business law too dry.
Yeah.
Really good.
No, actually, you made it very interesting. I have to say, I was so worried about it, but you made it so interesting.
Well, the thing is I learned it in a way that wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had to learn lots of rules and things like this, but, you know, once I gained knowledge, because I didn't know anything about this kind of stuff till I got to law school. You know, I mean, you know, my earliest legal education had been in the military, so, you know, we didn't deal with corporate law very much.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that, you know, one thing I did gauge from in law school, and that this stuff is important. It's, you know,
Yes.
it's important. And so, you know, you kind of took that with the fact, okay, it's boring, but it's important. And I've always wanted to make things that were important, also not boring.
Not boring,
If I could do it. You know, if I could do it, and so that's, you know, that's what I try to do. You know, the idea is that now you have the fundamentals where you not only, you know, you can go to work with it and you've learned things about it, but you have to have the fundamentals to grow your knowledge.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you got to say, this is how it's all set up, and this is kind of the reason it's set up this way, and this is the law, and that sort of thing, and so now I can get into more and more sophisticated things if I get a job in the corporate and business area. So, I'll tell you what I always found was a fascinating aspect of this kind of course is, you know, it's all about relationships. And remember, as a trial lawyer, you know, the sources of legal cases are either incidents like a car wreck or relationships. Family laws, all about relationships, for example. Contract laws, all about relationships, you know, but in a little bit different context. But I thought that I learned a lot about principal agent stuff. I mean, the idea of how, you know, respondeat superior. I remember thinking even in law school that if I ran a company and I had exercised all the safeguards, had my people well trained, you know, monitored their performance, you know, and one of my guys who's never had a wreck before, is a truck driver, causes a wreck. Why is it all visited on me? Well, the reason is that because I have control ultimately.
Right.
The people out there, they don't have any control over who you hire. So, I mean, I learned kind of policy reasons for things. I learned arguments for things that at first didn't make sense. The whole notion of the loyalty of the agent to the principal, you know, where, you know, if you are an employee, you have a duty to be loyal to your employer, you see. And so my point is that I think that what you're going to see in the 21st century is more employees are going to intentionally be owners of the companies they work for. because they want to know if they have something to say, that they've got, that they say, I'm invested in this too. So, it's gonna be interesting to see how this all translates through the law, okay? There are times that suits can be brought by dissident shareholders and things like this, but I think it's gonna be, I think every generation adds new ideas to the, to the mix. And I think the idea about people learning more through their, like 401ks. Now, you have stock funds and all this, and now people are starting to look and find out about these companies, and I think that's a good thing. I think you ought to know about it.
They take care better of their own business.
Yeah.
They can get engaged with the business. They could be part of it.
Right.
Right?
Right. And I think that that because there's so much ability, so much transparency by our companies here, I think that increases foreign investment, which is
Oh, yeah.
good.
Yes,
Yeah, they feel
absolutely.
comfortable to
Right.
invest in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what is going on. I know what is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My rights are protected,
Yeah.
Right.
I can check.
Well, the thing is that every government has some of the same problems, and every government has some unique problems. You look at history and everything, and we have, in some ways, are the most successful country in the world with all different kinds of people here. When I learned when I was in China, it's a lot easier when you got one culture.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, you know exactly what to do. You know exactly how to get them to do what you want to do. And that there's this common understanding, cultural. And then you get over here, and the good news is you get new ideas and you get creativity and stuff like that. But the bottom is, with respect to, the American way, the point is we may all share that, but there's a lot of other differences too. And it manifests itself even into the corporate area, like with Chick-fil-A.
Right.
So the thing is that what the answer to that is, if the majority of shareholders elected the directors and officers, and they appear to want to keep it closed on Sunday,
Okay.
who is anybody else to say anything?
Yeah.
They're not committing any crime. So
Yeah.
the thing, I'm just saying that, you have somebody, and let's say their religious holiday is on Saturday, so they close on Saturday.
Saturday.
It's just that kind of thing. When I first came to Texas, they had laws that you couldn't buy certain things on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were called the blue laws. And I remember I couldn't buy aftershave on Sunday because it had alcohol in it.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. I'm not going to drink that kind of
I know,
thing.
yeah.
Well, okay, folks, that's the end of class today. And
That's good.
yeah,
Oh.
I'll see you next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Next day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.